call to the order of the regular City Council meeting, December 17th, 2024. If you could please stand and join us in a moment of prayer and a pledge of allegiance with Mayor Hardman.
You will all just join me in a moment of silence. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please call the roll, Ms. Buhite.
Mrs. Sharpshire? Here. Mr. Cook?
Here.
Mr. Lovett?
Here.
Mr. Cox?
Here.
Mrs. Knight? Here. Mr. Schmidt?
Here. Yeah, that's all now.
Okay. And Mr. Tankersley is absent with notice. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes of the last meeting as distributed? Seeing none, those minutes will stand approved as written and distributed. Reports and communications, Mayor Hardman.
Yeah, so I want to just give a big congratulations and thanks to all of our public works staff, our recreation staff, Anna, for the great job they've done in putting together, number one, the festive atmosphere of our entire community and our public buildings, our tree lighting ceremony, which I think was a great new addition and hopefully a new tradition that will start and continue for a long time. And the Loop festivities for Christmas on the Loop, which was just we can't control the weather, but when the weather works out like it did this past weekend, it makes for a fantastic event. And so hopefully everybody enjoyed. I know in walking around to some of the businesses, they certainly were appreciative of the opportunity to get out there and be a part of that. Some of you may have seen that there was some Facebook, there was a Facebook share that went out today from Charcuterie Creations on the Square that they will be closing their every day or their operations on December 21st. I will tell you that we were aware of it within the last few days. We did not know that they were going to put out a public post. Because we were having conversations. We continue to have conversations with them because we have a lease that goes until the end of 2025. So we are talking about what that means and what their expectations and our expectations are. And if there's a way to make those two things meet, we will. But unfortunately, they were unable to make it work for them. To continue to offer at least a cafe sort of business. So we will be looking at what's next in that environment. And then obviously we still have a lease, so we're figuring that piece out. So we'll have more details on you for with that as we learn them. And obviously we'll have to have a CIC meeting quickly within the new year in order to figure out if there's some kind of change or agreement that we wish to proceed on. So CIC will meet to deal with that. Any questions about that? Monthly's Mayor Court report for November 2024, we collected a total of $18,955. Year to date, $223,981. The full breakdown will be made part of the minutes for anyone who wishes to see that. That is my report for this evening. I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. That's it.
All right, thank you. Safety Service, Mr. Lucas.
Thank you. Just legislation this evening. Ordinance 2024-64E. If approved, would continue our longstanding relationship with George Glover. The rates for 2025 would remain stable. What is changing, however, is currently George is with Focus Capital Solutions through the Taft Law Firm And in January, they are going to be merging with the Dinsmore counterpart, which is called DSD Advisors. Our contact would still be George. George, unfortunately, could not be here tonight. He is in Columbus with the final legislative sessions of the year up there. But again, nothing changing with the rates. The merger really doesn't impact us at all because George would still be our contact person. Resolution 2024 R06 is the annual piece of legislation to allow us to put items on the internet that are surplus in nature. Any questions on either of those two? If not, ordinance 2024-69E is our annual salary ordinance. Scott and or Rachel will talk about that. And then Scott also has the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then another one, ordinance 2024-76E as well.
Good evening. So this is kind of the annual year-end budget packet. So there is, a handful or so pieces of legislation. There are two pieces of legislation we're going to ask here in a few minutes that you accept amendments to. They've been edited from what went out in the council packet, so I'll kind of go through those and discuss those as we get to them. First is the salary ordinance, ordinance 2024-69E. This one encompasses sort of the 3% COLA and kind of it just rolls that forward. The only addition is the position, the property maintenance, the code enforcement officer, the part-time. That was kind of requested as, through some committee meeting discussions with the budget. Everything else is the same. This is the one of the two that are amended from what went out in the council packet. The part-time positions, I think it's great, it's SU and V that are in different places throughout the ordinance. The part-time positions did not have the COLA passed through to them in the calculation. So we've updated that and reflected. That is the packet that's in your hand here. So the part-time lines are 3% higher than they were in the packet that went out over the weekend. So any questions on that? The next ordinance, 2024-70E, this is the original appropriation ordinance for the 2025 budget. Kind of as we discussed many times before and in many years past. There's a 3-page packet at your desk. There is a reconciliation on page 3 that ties out what the total appropriations on the budget workbook that we talked about during the work session in November, and kind of reconciles that out to the ordinance that's in front of you this evening, ordinance 70E. So they're probably one of the smaller years of changes. There's just 5 items there. A couple of them to point out is Public Works is kind of, we got a late quote from Enterprise. And the quote is, they have a couple of diesel pickup trucks, and we'd kind of like to get out of that diesel business and anything that's smaller than our dump trucks. They have some upcoming maintenance for the new diesel emissions. It's going to be a little bit more cost prohibitive. And there's also kind of a desire to downsize the trucks that community development is driving. They're in the 3/4 ton crew cab Enterprise trucks that most of the city offices have. So what this is doing is going to allow Public Works to bring to you next year to dispose of a couple of pickup trucks. And Enterprise has quoted us some estimates that we'll be able to dispose of those rather well. And we're going to buy 2 Ford Maverick hybrids to pick community development in, a little bit more appropriate size. Should do better on fuel economy. Those 2 F-250s that they have, once we receive the replacements, will be transitioned over to Public Works. A couple smaller changes, had a $30,000 duplication in the budget. We removed that. And the other one is, I'll talk about the City Hall, North City Hall project here later on. And then there's an unencumbered portion of the 607 Convention Center expansion project still. We're kind of budgeting $100,000 of what's left of that, which that is the majority of it, but not all of it. Budgeting that as Jim Doughton's been working very hard to sort of work on getting those payouts processed and finished up here in the last month and a half, 2 months. So, any questions about Ordinance 2024-70E? 71E, very similar. This is actually the exact same piece of legislation from last year. It has the same transfers and the same advances. This was updated with the ordinance number. So it is as we planned in the budget work session. 2024-72E, this is simply updating the rates for the cost allocation plan. The cost allocation plan is allocating cost to the fire fund, the convention center fund, and the senior housing fund. We update a kind of a 3-year rolling average of those rates every year. We took a little bit of pride. Last year's legislation, we adopted the plan and approved the rates. Our plan document that we adopted with last year's legislation, Ordinance 2023-80, is still valid. So that plan document has been kind of unchanged. This is just updating the 3-year rolling average of rates. Ordinance 2023-73E. This is kind of a new piece, but one we kind of plan to do moving forward. Earlier, the middle of 2024, we got rid of the 101 General Fund Reserve Fund. It didn't really fit into our fund balance practice that we have today. It kind of had $400,000 kind of sitting in this fund, and if we needed this extra money, we would come to council and ask to move it back to the general fund. So it didn't really tie in with kind of what we do with the general fund balance and the reserve we have built into that balance today compared to what we did 10 or 15 years ago. So we eliminated that. We kind of created a new 911 department that was available, only available for expenditure upon the declaration of an emergency from the mayor. So if we would be affected by some form of an emergency, a crisis, that would be kind of the funds we would use to at least get us through until it's practical to get council back together and decide if additional budget resources are needed. Any questions about either one of those items? Ordinance 2024-74E, maybe not the longest of the pieces of legislation, but probably the one that had the most work that goes into it, because this is sort of, we're pouring the last bit of cement on the 2024 budget. After this, it's sort of locked in. So this one is also amended. The very top item, I believe a copy of this was distributed at your desk. The general fund civil services, the 10740, there's an $1,000 additional appropriations there. Everything else is as distributed in your packet. There's a few minor budget corrections. The funding of an advance for a police grant fund to help account for that. And then the bulk of it is in the transfers section. And this is authorizing some year-end set-asides from the general fund, $100,000 to the separation benefits fund, to the facilities improvement fund. Anything in the general fund unencumbered over $11.5 million, up to $10 million will be sent over to the 401 capital fund as we close out 2024. The fire fund is setting aside $350,000 to their separation benefits fund and $450,000 to their equipment fund. So, any questions about that ordinance? I'll skip in order then. 75E, I think Rachel and the chief are here to maybe speak on that one. 76E is ratifying the bids that we've received for the North City Hall renovation and authorizing the safety service director to enter into that contract. So we did receive some successful bids that are awardable and kind of fit within our budget that we set in the 2024 budget. So we will kind of move forward over the next week and a half, 2 weeks to get that contract into place, or at least get the PO in place to lock that into the '24 budget. Work on finalizing the contract here in the near future. So a lot of activity will start to happen over there. We ended up, that budget had some excess in it to kind of handle contingency along with sort of the outfitting, furniture and other different little pieces of hardware that aren't part of the construction contract. So we did take that $100,000 and that was added into the 2025 budget. That was that other item where we added $100,000 to the 401 capital fund to kind of push that forward. There were some additional contingency dollars built into the 2025 budget to assume that. So, so we're excited to kind of see that project move forward, but that's also a collection of 2 or 3 different building structures. So, I mean, we will face a little bit of unknown as we work through that. So, any questions about that? I know it was a mouthful. All right, thank you very much.
Rachel and/or Chief Nesbitt's here to talk about ordinance 2024-75E, dealing with an MOU regarding military time in the police department.
Good evening. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. 75E addresses a MOU that we entered into with the 2 respective unions of the police department, the sergeants and the officers. It addresses chapters 28 in their respective contracts that pertains to their compensation during their military deployment. The adjustment that's made in the MOU, I think, accurately reflects what the intent was during any service members' involuntary deployment during their military service requirements. Are there any questions? Sir, did you want me to go ahead and cover the car disposal? Additionally, ordinance 24-78 authorizes the Safety Service Director to dispose of 2 of our decommissioned police cruisers. These vehicles have served their complete service life and are ready to be disposed of. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
All right, ordinance 2024-79 deals with the disposal of our reserve engine, 86. It's been a reserve engine for a few years now, and the maintenance costs are simply getting too cost prohibitive to keep that going. So Chief Sunderman's asking to dispose of that at this time. 2024 ADE is the purchase of 4 cardiac monitors for the fire department. This was in the 2025 budget at an estimated cost of $220,055. In working with Westchester on a joint purchasing partnership, the cost is now just under $175,000. But Stryker needs the commitment prior to the end of the year. That's why this is in front of you today. Any questions on that? And then the last item is a voice vote, similar in nature to what Chief Sunderman was requesting, but for Public Works.
Good evening. The voice vote that I'm requesting tonight is to allow Safety Service Director to provide a letter of intent to purchase the Johnston Street sweeper. There is one currently in the area that was built to our spec that they're willing to effectively put our name on it, waiting for 2025 appropriations. Should that sweeper be sold before we are able to get our appropriations, there's currently a 10-month build time on those sweepers. So this is just asking for that letter of intent. We do have the ability to back out of that letter of intent should something happen that we no longer move forward with that sweeper. It is the one that we would spec. It is here in the region, and it would save us 10 months of trying to keep our current sweeper on the road. Any questions? Thank you.
That's it tonight.
All right, thank you. My report, I had the pleasure of participating again this year in Shop with a Cop. For those of you who do not know how that runs, it takes a lot of volunteers, a lot of officers' time. Officer Aaron Hayes puts that together every year and arranges so that the officers can pick up the children at their homes. They come to the Blue Goose for a breakfast, and then they go out and actually shop with the officer with the funds provided to them. It's a great experience, helping them shop for themselves and their family. Sue Knight was there serving up breakfast, and Miss Buhite plays a role as Mrs. Claus every year, and then the officers. Well, no children are watching, but yeah, I'm sure. I don't know who watches. But then they come back for a pizza lunch, get to meet Mr. and Mrs. Claus, and wrap their gifts. So great experience. If you haven't had the opportunity to do that over the years, join us next year for that event. So thank you, Chief, for allowing that to happen. It's a great event. That's it for my report. Everybody have a safe and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And with that, Clerk of Council, Ms. Buhite.
Thank you. No report.
All right. Auditor, Mr. Cunningham.
I don't have a lot to report. We are about 91% through the year, and we've only spent about 71% of our budget. I anticipate that, based on what's encumbered already, I anticipate that gap to shrink a little bit by the end of the year, probably a lot, actually. But in terms of working cash, we're still at an elevated level. We anticipate that to level off and maybe even grow a little bit, and so that will sort of fuel our capital projects going into 2025. So that is my report. Everybody have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Treasurer, Mr. Irie.
Good evening. Thank you. The tax report is on file with the Clerk of Council. Just wanted to point out a few numbers since this is the last tax report of the year. Comparison-wise, revenue from 24 and 23, we are up 16% year-to-date for the general fund. In revenue, we're up 17% in the street fund to date. Fire fund is up 8%. Senior housing fund is only down slightly, 0.04%, I'm sorry. And the convention center fund is up 29% compared to last year this time. So all good numbers at the end of the year. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, seeing none. Law Director, Mr. Lippert.
Thank you, sir. A lot of the time I don't have a report, and it's not because I'm not doing anything. It's because as the law director, a lot of what I deal with is privileged communication within the city, but sometimes I do get to brag on myself, or in this case, Mr. McKeon with myself. So property used for municipal purposes within the state of Ohio is potentially exempt from property taxes. So when you have a project like the convention center, which was in a property tax exempt status, but then you put a big addition on it like we did, that tax exempt status goes away. And so Mr. McKeon's been working with me on filing a new application to renew our tax exempt property status for the convention center. We got that done. I got it filed down at the auditor's office, and she said we'd have an answer within 18 months. So, other than that, wishing Mr. Tankersley a speedy recovery if he's watching, and I'm available for questions if anyone has any.
Seeing none, thank you. At this time, are there any residents desiring to be heard before council this evening? Sir, if you come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record, please.
My name's Mike Donnelly. I live at 4011 Creek Road, part of the Creek Estates. I just have two things I want to comment on. One, on behalf of my brother and my sister and myself, we want to thank the city, this council, and the Veterans Committee for the effort put forth on generating and posting the banners during the Veterans Week. It is very much appreciated, and we thank you very much for doing that. My father was a World War II hero, being awarded the Bronze Star, and I know he would appreciate being in the position that he was in. So we wanted to thank you for that. Secondly, I wanted to thank the council and the police department, specifically for the attention paid to issues that were generated or expressed earlier this year a couple of different times about the stop sign at LJ and Creek and the speeding associated with that street. We've seen the signs, the stop signs, the lighted stop signs mounted and posted. A non-professional but general observation is that they've had an impact. We think we see more people stopping. I don't know that it has a great impact on the speeding part of it, but the stop signs seem to have been working. They can be seen and are very much appreciated. Additionally, the newly mounted speeding signs along Creek, I think there are two of them, one down by the rec center and one up by the church on Creek. Hopefully they'll have an impact at keeping the speed on Creek, primarily northbound coming down the hill, to their correct levels. So we wanted to just thank everybody for that attention. I know there were a couple of other items that we had requested regarding that, and my understanding is that they are on hold, or I don't know if they've been dismissed yet regarding parking, but nonetheless, we very much appreciated everything that's been done. I just wanted to say thanks, rather than putting it into the Facebook or someplace like that.
Sure, thank you. Mr. Lippert?
Compliments to Chief Nesbitt's department, where I also am the prosecutor in Mayor's Court, and the traffic enforcement program STEP has focused on that specific intersection based on the feedback from yourself and your neighbors. And I remember making a commitment to you and your neighbors that if those infractions came across in Mayor's Court, which they have, that I would politely refuse to do any reductions on those, and I have. So just giving you an update on that.
Thank you.
Ms. Knight?
Mike, I just want to say thank you to you and your father. Your father was the best man I ever knew. He loved my cookies. I knew that. And
As does his son.
yes. And I just want to say I was so honored to get to know him. So I just want to say thank you to you for being such a hero. Thank you.
All I had.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Any other residents at this time? Yes, ma'am.
So very short. Oh my goodness, I don't want to follow that. But my name is Stephanie Lemming, and I just wanted to stop by and introduce myself. I'm the new branch manager at the Sharonville Branch Library, so if you haven't been in lately, feel free to stop by. Not much to report tonight, but we do have some big plans for 2025 that I'm excited to share with you in the near future. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other residents? All right, we have one more opportunity. Seeing none, council committees, community development is Mr. Tankersley, who is absent with notice. Budget and finance and project oversight, Mr. Cook.
Thank you. No report for either committee, but I will say I will start sending out invites as placeholders for our next meetings in 2025. And my goal is to get us back on our cadence of meeting the council meeting prior to when we report out. I know we had some scheduling issues, and that would be the goal. So keep an eye out for those. Thank you.
Thank you. Community services, Mr. Lovett.
Good evening, thank you. I don't have anything to report tonight. Our next meeting will be January 8th, due to the week before that is the holiday, first of the year. Also, I did talk to Mr. Tankersley today. He wanted me to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He is recovering, but he's feeling it, so just keep him in your thoughts. So, Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Honored citizens, Ms. Knight.
Yes. Tonight I'm also honoring Shop with the Cop. Saturday I did play a role, small part, helping serve breakfast for the kids at the Blue Goose. I was Terry's elf. Just watching our police and their families, a lot of them brought their kids to help shop, and that was great. But just to interact with the kids was great, quite overwhelming. I overheard a couple of the kids say, Officer Aaron told us to wake up at 7, but one of them got up at 6, and the other one, she said, oh, I got up at 4. The rest of the day of shopping at Walmart's and lunch at the convention center continued to be a big success for the kids. Thank you, Sharonville Police, especially Aaron Hayes, for making this a very Merry Christmas for these kiddos, and Terry. Thank you.
Thank you. Law and Public Safety, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you. The next Law and Public Safety Committee meeting will be on the 7th of January, 4 p.m. Administrative Conference Room. Wishing you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Rules suspension and motions. First and only reading for immediate effectivity of ordinances 2024-69E, 2024-70E, 2024-71E, 2024-72E, 2024-73, 2024-74E, 2024-75E, 2024-76E, and 2024-80E. Is there a motion for late delivery, or I'm sorry, motion for rule suspension for those ordinances as read? So first, Mr. Levitt, second, Ms. Knight. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Those opposed, no. All right, that motion carries. Rule suspension motions for the first and only reading for 30-day effectivity of ordinances 2024-78 and 2024-79. Is there a motion for rule suspension for those ordinances as read? Ms. Sharpshire, thank you for the first. Mr. Cox, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, yes? Yes. Those opposed, no. That motion is passed. Rule suspension motions for the second and third reading for immediate effectivity of ordinance 2024-64E and resolution 2024-R-06E. I have a motion on that. Mr. Schmidt, thank you for the first. Mr. Levitt, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, yes? Yes. All those opposed, no. Thank you. That motion is passed. Unfinished business, Ms. Buhite.
Okay. So second and third reading of emergency ordinance 2024-64E, authorizing 2 professional contracts with DSD Advisors LLC for legislative consulting services and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-64E? So moved by Mr. Cook and second by Ms. Sharpshire. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire? Yes. Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Levitt?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency ordinance 2024-64E has been approved. Second and third reading of emergency resolution 2024-R06E, resolution declaring intent to conduct internet auctions for the sale of unneeded, obsolete, or unfit city personal property during calendar year 2025 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-R-06-E? Ms. Knight, thank you for the first. Mr. Cook, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Levitt?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency resolution 2024-R06E has been approved.
Thank you.
Emergency ordinance 2024-69E. This is a first and only reading. Authorizing the salary ordinance, employee hourly ranges, and authorized strength of positions and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-69E? Mr. Levitt, thank you for the first. Ms. Knight, I'm sorry, thank you for the second. Any discussion? All right. I'm sorry? Yeah. So as part of this discussion, I need a motion to amend and replace ordinance 2024-69E with the amended ordinance 2024-69E, which is provided to you this evening. Do I have a motion on that? Ms. Sharpshire, thank you for the first. Mr. Cook, thank you for the second. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, so we're voting now to replace with the amended ordinance. So roll call, please.
That's all. Did we, the motion, or?
We took the motion to accept the
Okay.
amendment. Now we're going to vote on that, and then we'll vote on the passage of that amended ordinance.
All right. Mrs. Sharpshire?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now, do I have a motion for the passage of the amended ordinance 2024-69E? Ms. Sharpshire, thank you for the first. Mr. Cook, thank you for the second. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency Ordinance 2024-69E has been approved. First and only reading of 2024-70E, an ordinance to make permanent appropriations for the expenses and other expenditures of the City of Sharonville, State of Ohio during the fiscal year ending December 31, 2025, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-70-E? Mr. Lovett, thank you for the first. Mr. Cox, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Ordinance 2024-70E has been approved. First and only reading of ordinance 2024-71E, transfer and advance of funds for the year 2025 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-71-E? Mr. Cook, thank you for the first. Mr. Cox, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Ordinance 2024-71E has been approved. First and only reading of emergency ordinance 2024-72E, authorizing the City of Sharonville 2025 cost allocation plan and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-72-E? Ms. Knight, thank you for the first. Mr. Lovett, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency ordinance 2024-72E has been approved. First and only reading of ordinance 2024-73, amending 2025 appropriations for the general fund emergency response budget.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-73? Ms. Sharpshire, thank you for the first. Mr. Cook, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt? Ordinance 2024-73E has been approved. Ordinance 2024-74E, amending 2024 appropriations for various funds, establishing a fund, authorizing transfer of funds, authorizing advance of funds, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-74-E? Mr. Lovett, thank you for the first. Ms. Knight, thank you for the second. Any discussion? All right, so we now need another motion because you have before you the amended ordinance provided to you this evening. So do I have a motion to amend and replace ordinance 2024-74E with amended ordinance 2024-74E? Sharpshire, thank you first. Mr. Cook, thank you for the second. Any discussion on that? All right, seeing none, we're voting on the acceptance of the amended ordinance to replace the original ordinance. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, do I have a motion for the passage of the amended ordinance 2024-74E? Ms. Sharpshire, thank you for the first, and I'll take Mr. Cook for the second again. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire? Yes. Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Amended ordinance 2024-74E has been approved. First and only reading of emergency ordinance 2024-75E, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a memorandum of understanding which the Council of Sharonville hereby approves, modifying the collective bargaining agreement with the Fraternal Order of Police, Ohio Labor Council, Inc., for the currently effective bargaining period to define the application of Article 28, Section 28.3, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-75-E? Mr. Cox, thank you for the first. Ms. Knight, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire? Yes. Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency ordinance 2024-75E has been approved. First and only reading of emergency ordinance 2024-76E, authorizing the Safety Service Director to award a contract for construction administration services and award a contract to the lowest and best bidder regarding the North City Hall renovation and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-76-E? Mr. Cook, thank you for the first. Mr. Cox, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire? Yes. Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency ordinance 2024-76E has been approved. First reading of ordinance 2024-77, an ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component codes of the codified ordinances of Sharonville, Ohio. That's just first reading. First and only reading of emergency ordinance 2024-78, authorizing the Safety Service Director to dispose of police department vehicles.
Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-78? Ms. Knight, thank you for the first. Ms. Sharpshire, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire? Yes. Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency ordinance 2024-78 has been approved. Emergency ordinance 2024-79, this is a first and only reading, authorizing the Safety Service Director to dispose of Fire Department Vehicle Fire Engine 86.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-79? Mr. Levitt, thank you for the first. Ms. Knight, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire? Yes. Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency ordinance 2024-79 has been approved. First and only reading of emergency ordinance 2024-80E, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to purchase fire department monitors, defibrillators, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Is there a motion for ordinance 2024-80-E? Ms. Sharpshire, thank you for the first. Mr. Cook, thank you for the second. Any discussion? Seeing, Mr.
Just a real quick question, or comment. We discussed this extensively in Law Committee, and I wish the chief was here because I'd ask him if he were here to talk about what this equipment does to our units in responding to cardiac events. And it is a wonderful, wonderful improvement in transporting them to the hospital as well as getting them into the cardiac unit at the hospital. And this enables them to bypass a number of steps because they have the communications already being established while they're transporting the person to the hospital. So they're already set up as they roll into the hospital to take the person directly in. It's a wonderful improvement. It's a couple $100,000, which was in union with the Westchester Department also. But just as a note, how pleased I was personally, and I would like to have the chief here to talk about it also. But it is a wonderful improvement, and I think it really exemplifies how we care about our citizens and our people and their needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the information. Very informative. So
we had a first and a second. Any more discussion? All right, seeing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sharpshire?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency ordinance 2024-80E has been approved.
Thank you.
And that's it.
All right, we have a voice vote to allow the Public Works Department to provide a letter of intent to purchase a Johnson Street sweeper per budget appropriations once 2025 appropriations are available. Do I have a first on that? Mr. Levitt, thank you for the first. Ms. Knight, thank you for the second. Any discussion? All right, no discussion. All those in favor say yes. Yes. Those opposed, no. Okay, that motion is passed. Thank you. At this time, are there any residents desiring to be heard before council? Mr. Schmidt, come on up.
Jim Schmidt, 12215 Pickwick Place. I just want to confirm, starting in January, we're back to the 2 council meetings
Yes, sir.
per month?
Yep.
Okay, just wanted to confirm. Also, I want to say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of you. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Got another request here. Since Mr. Schmidt brought up the council calendar, I need a voice vote by council here to accept our 2025 council calendar, which identifies our dates of council meetings, budget work session. So do I have a motion for that? Thank you for the first, Mr. Lovett. Mr. Cook, thank you for the second. Is there any discussion on that? Yes, sir. Mr. Cox?
There's a break in June when we go on vacation, but that whole, the 16th through the 19th, I'll be on vacation. So, I mean, you can put me down for vacation.
Absent with notice right now? All right.
Right. Just remind me.
And I believe swim team championships are July 8th, 7th and 8th.
July 7th and 8th? Okay.
But they're not in Sharonville.
So do we want to look at adjusting one of the dates? So we can't cancel and, yes, so,
I do not need it adjusted in July, thanks.
okay. Right, they had swim team championships in July.
If we were hosting, I'd say yes, but since we're not, we're good.
Okay. So you can be absent with notice? All right. Any further discussion on the council calendar? All right, all those in favor say yes. Yes. Those opposed, no. All right, that has passed. And Mr. Schmidt, the first meeting in January is on the 14th of January. So we'll see you here, correct? All right. All right, awesome. Thank you. Is there any other matters to be heard before council this evening?
I do.
Ms. Sharpshire.
I just want to say, as I conclude my first year of my 2-year term, what a pleasure it's been serving the citizens of Sharonville, and I look forward to a new term. So thank you. Have a happy Christmas and a healthy, happy New Year.
Thank you. Any other matters? All right, seeing none, we are going to adjourn into an executive session as per the Ohio Revised Code 121.22G2 to consider the purchase of property for public purposes. When we come back from executive session, I don't believe there's any other matters to be heard before council this evening, so we'll immediately adjourn after that. So, do I have a motion to go into executive session? Mr. Cook for the first, and Ms. Sharpshire, thank you for the second. So we'll go into executive session.
Roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry, roll call,
That's all right.
please.
Mrs. Sharpshire?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.